Good morning and welcome to the CABE webinar for October 2019, and today we are looking at the latest in energy efficiency of buildings. My name's Katie and I look after the IT and digital infrastructure here at CABE, and I'll be acting as your moderator for this morning's session. We like to make our webinars nice and interactive, so we do encourage you throughout the session to send in any questions as we go along, and then we'll look to do a Q&A at the end of the actual presentation. So to get in touch with us, you can type in questions. You'll have a little panel on your screen. It'll either be at the top or the side, depending on how you're viewing us today. Just go to the questions section and then type in any questions, and then they'll, as I say, come up on my screen. And when we get to the end, we'll then look to go through the questions that you send in. If we kind of get loads and loads of questions, it may be that we don't come to them all this morning, but what we can do is forward on any questions that you do have to this morning's presenter, and then you can sort of enter into conversation sort of separately and outside of the webinar session. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can still ask questions. Please do send anything over to us, info@cbuild.com. And then if you're on Twitter, send us your pictures, chat to us using the hashtag CABECPD. So this morning, your presenter today is Jason Hewins. Now, Jason leads Elmhurst Energy's on-construction support team, providing technical support and guidance to Elmhurst members who undertake staff assessments on new dwellings to show compliance with building regulations. He's been with Elmhurst for more than a decade and is fully trained as an on-construction domestic energy assessor. So if you give me a couple of seconds, I'm just going to hand over to Jason and he'll take control and go through this morning's presentation with you. Excellent.
Okay. Is that all showing okay? Yeah.
Yeah, we're there. All yours.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here today. As you said, my name's Jason Hewins, and I'll be delivering today's presentation, which is a bit of a high-level look at the latest in energy efficiency policies in buildings. So just before we start, just to introduce Elmhurst Energy, if you've not come across us before, we've been around for over 25 years. We were founded in 1993, and we're currently the largest accreditation body for energy assessors who produce EPCs in the UK. We have over 7,000 members, and last year we issued, through our scheme, approximately around 900,000 EPCs. So our members are generally a mix of architects, surveyors, developers. We have consultants, approved inspectors, and building control professionals as well. We cover all types of building, so we cover new build houses, we cover existing houses, and we also cover commercial and public buildings as well. In addition to that, we also run competent person schemes for air tightness testers, domestic ventilation testers, thermographers, and air conditioning inspectors. Okay, as I said, we cover all regions of the UK. We also sit on numerous industry panels, and we speak regularly with government about energy efficiency policy, and we represent our members and provide their feedback back to government to help influence policy going forwards. So today, as you've guessed, it's all about energy efficiency. Now, I'm not here to give a lecture about climate change, but there does seem to be a lot of news around climate change and environmental concerns at the moment. Obviously, lots of the faces you see on screen will be familiar to you and have been in the news recently for various different reasons. It does seem to be that the world is becoming more aware around sort of climate change and energy efficiency. And there does seem to be a greater drive, certainly in the UK, to take action and start to make some steps towards improving energy efficiency in buildings, certainly. So this year alone, just to go through some of the headlines that have sort of happened this year, which are relevant to us here at Elmhurst, you can see lots and lots of things have been happening. One of the big ones for us in spring, in March, was the announcement of the Future Home Standard, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But that's very important for us in terms of new build homes and the sort of path to building regulations going forwards. There's been obviously lots of protests and things going on. David Attenborough's climate change programs have got a lot of viewers and a lot of press. Theresa May, when she finished in the summer, announced that the UK have signed up to be a net zero carbon emissions country by 2050, which was quite a big commitment, and we'll need a lot of work to get there. A lot of local authorities have signed up to this notion of a climate emergency this summer, and Boris Johnson again supported the net zero target in his first speech in Parliament in July. And the bottom one is the most recent one, and probably one of the most important ones that I'm going to talk about today, is as part of the Future Homes Standard. There was a consultation issued last week proposing some improvements and uplifts to Part F and L of the building regulations. So there's a lot that's been going on this year alone. So today I'm going to cover, I am going to mention the Brexit effect. Unfortunately, I'll only have one slide on it because I know not everybody wants to hear any more about Brexit. I'll talk about the Clean Growth Strategy, which is the government's strategy to get us to our targets in the future. We'll look at the decarbonising of the electricity grid in particular, and then I'll focus on new build residential dwellings, what's happening in that area, existing dwellings, commercial and public buildings, and then we'll have a conclusion and Q&A. So unfortunately, I'm going to mention Brexit, but I won't dwell on it too long. We are still members of the EU for now, so we do have to abide by their laws, which includes environmental laws and energy efficiency laws as well, which will have some bearing on some of the points that I discussed in the Part L consultation that was issued last week. Now we are looking to copy the EU laws into our own law, which was part of the Great Repeal Bill in 2017. We also have our own commitments as well. So we've got the UN Paris Climate Change Agreement. As I said, this year we announced that we're going to be a net zero carbon nation by 2050. And there's some of the commitments we've made as well recently, which I'll talk about in future. So although Brexit is dragging on, we don't see it having too much of a bearing on what we do going forwards in terms of energy efficiency, and for us as a business and for our members, we certainly don't believe it will affect energy performance certificates in any significant way. In fact, we will actually have a bit more freedom to do with what we want with them going forward. Okay. So the Clean Growth Strategy was published in 2017. It was a document that was published by BASE, as we pronounce them, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy area. And this set a lot of aims and thoughts about how we can get to a low carbon future in this country. Some of the headlines I've got here. So there was a commitment to review building regulations, which, as I said, happened last week. They introduced what we call the minimum energy efficiency standards, and also set targets that all privately rented homes will need to be a band C or better on their EPC by 2030. They're looking at rolling out new schemes to improve the amount of retrofitting of existing dwellings. They've got similar goals in commercial buildings as well. And this document was really published based on the next slide I'm going to show you, where they were predicting the carbon emissions for the country going forwards. And we'd been on a decline since 1990 really, but we were kind of hit a plateau, and it was predicted that if we keep on the trajectory that we currently have with the policies we currently have, our carbon emissions may actually even increase from houses. So the government recognised that, and they set out the Clean Growth Strategy to address that and make sure we stay on course to meet our obligations. So if we adopt everything in the Clean Growth Strategy, and if that comes through into policy, you can see the green line there, we should continue to reduce our carbon emissions in buildings going forwards, as I said, with the aim of getting to net zero carbon in 2050. Now, as a result of the Clean Growth Strategy, there has been dozens of consultations that have been issued by the government, which I've got shown here. I'm not going to obviously read them all out, but there are some that are very, very important to us as an industry, and some that are very, very relevant to us as a business as well, and to our members. So the important thing is that we see consultations as an opportunity for our members to voice their opinions on the industry and ourselves as well. So we try to respond to as many of these consultations as possible. And some of them are affecting existing buildings, some are affecting new buildings, some of them are England only, some of them are Scotland or Northern Ireland, but all of them are equally as important to us. And there's lots of policies in there and aims which are very positive. We need to see them carry through to policy now to make sure we continue on our trend to reducing carbon emissions in buildings. Okay, so some of the key ones there that we've responded to, EPCs in buildings was issued a year ago, and that was asking for people's opinions on the use and role of EPCs and what's displayed on EPCs. There's a few various ones on reviewing building regulations, both in Scotland and in England, which was issued recently. Eco, so looking at schemes for retrofitting existing buildings with insulation and energy efficiency measures, and also looking at the Green Deal and what could be improved going forwards to replace the Green Deal. So lots and lots of activity in the last particular year, all coming out of the Green Deal, the Clean Growth Strategy document. Okay. So the next section, I'm going to talk about the electricity grid and the decarbonisation, as we've called it, of the electricity grid, which is it's really important for setting our future path to reducing our carbon emissions, and also it influences the future of building regulations and how we want houses to be built in this country. So just to go through some stats first of all. Last year, low carbon energy was used to generate more than half of the UK electricity for the first time. Okay, so our traditional methods of coal and gas have started to decrease, and obviously the increase in renewable energy and nuclear power as well has seen the grid change quite substantially over the last few years. Coal generation has now dropped to a record low of 5%, and we can only see it getting lower as well from this point. Okay, so electricity in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of building regulations and energy performance certificates has always been seen as the dirtiest fuel, the worst fuel for carbon emissions and cost. But based on what's happening with the grid over the last few years, that may no longer be the case going forwards. So you can see here, this is a graph showing the proportion of generation from different sources for electricity for last year, and you can see renewables was the only source that actually increased, so it grew by 33% from the previous year. Grew to 33% from the previous year, whereas gas, nuclear, coal, that's all decreasing. So as the capacity of renewables increases, the other sources of generation are slowly falling away. So there's a Twitter feed that you might want to look out. It's called MyGridGB. It's a very interesting page, and it shows the proportion of Britain's electricity generation mix on I think it's 2 or 3 times daily that they report it actually. So I just took a snapshot last week. And you can see here on the 2nd of October at midday we had nuclear doing 17%, gas around 40%. But then if we add our renewables up, so wind, solar, hydro, biomass, that's almost a third of the generation on that particular day was coming from renewable sources. So it's a very interesting snapshot showing what's going on at any particular time. And you can see the proportion of each source quite clearly. So looking at the past decade, this graph shows how electricity supply has changed in the past decade. So you can see gas is the very sort of top line, and you can see that has decreased, and the dashed lines are what's projected to happen over the next few years as well. So you can see gas is declining, coal has declined rapidly and is expected to be pretty much gone in the next few years. Nuclear has declined slightly, and again is still expected to decline until we get our new nuclear power stations up and running. The blue line showing storage and sort of renewable generation. You can see that's obviously increasing dramatically since 2008, and it's expected to increase even more steeply after this year going forwards. Okay, so that's what's happened in the past 10 years, which is quite interesting because the current version of building regulations that we use in this country were developed around 2011, 2012, and you can see the picture of energy generation has changed dramatically since that time, which will influence what we see coming shortly in the next version of regulations. Okay. Projected going forwards, so these are taken from BASE's data, and you can see, as we expect, renewables is just going up and up and up, and expected to make the majority of our electricity generation sort of in the very near future. Gas is declining. Again, nuclear long term is expected to increase as we get more power stations coming online. And coal, if you can see that at the bottom, as I said, it's around 5% last year, but it's expected to be, very, very minimal, if used at all, going forwards. Okay. So moving on to what's happening in the new build residential sector. So there's lots of noise and information going on, and documents being issued recently. One of the major things that is affecting the industry is the Hackett review that was published last year. Now, obviously, that focuses mainly on sort of fire regulations, but it also will have, we expect, wider reaching implications on the building control process, and how we sign off dwellings, and who takes ownership and responsibility for certain parts of checking compliance. So we do expect that to have some effect on energy efficiency policy going forward as well. Okay, the government have grand challenges that they issued last year. One of those is to halve the energy use of new homes by 2030 compared to current levels. So to do that, that's quite an ambitious target. We're going to need some uplifts in building regulations to get there. Okay, now we've not had a change in building regulations in terms of energy efficiency in this country since 2013. So obviously 2030 is not that far away. How many building regulations changes do we think we're going to need to get to halving our energy use of new homes? I would suggest we're going to need at least 2 or 3 to get there. Okay, the Future Home Standard was announced earlier this year, and that has an aim of ending the use of fossil fuel heating systems in all new builds by 2025. Okay, gas central heating is still the predominantly used source of heating in this country. That, if we meet our target by 2025, is going to take quite a significant change in the way industry views central heating, and moving away from traditional measures to lower carbon technologies. So in this section today, I'll be focusing on, in England and Wales, Part F and L, the approved documents. In Scotland, we're looking at Section 6 and 3. And in Northern Ireland, the energy efficiency requirements are contained in Technical Booklet F. Okay. Now, I did mention earlier that we are still part of the EU, and there was a recast of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive a couple of years ago. And this sets the standards for new builds and refurbished buildings in terms of aiming for reducing their energy use. And they set an aim of making all new buildings what they call nearly zero energy buildings. And they aim for 2019 for public buildings and all of the buildings by January 2021. Okay. So this is looking at changing the way we measure energy efficiency in buildings, which has traditionally been based around cost and CO2. We're now moving to something called primary energy. CO2 is still important, of course, but as I showed you earlier, due to the changes in the electricity generation on the grid, the intensity of electricity generation is actually dropping below the traditional fuels such as gas. So CO2, in terms of a measure of energy efficiency of a building, may not be the most relevant metric going forwards. So just some challenges and ideas that the future building regulations are going to have to look at, and they're trying to address, particularly when we talk around air tightness. We hear a lot of stories and experiences from our members where buildings are built to an extremely high level of air tightness, but the ventilation system just isn't adequate to let that house breathe, and that has unintended consequences in terms of indoor air quality and insufficient removal of pollutants. We have moisture and damp issues sometimes occurring, and also buildings are prone to overheating as well if there is insufficient ventilation. Now Part L and Part F, which governs ventilation, they are separate documents at the moment, and quite often they're almost seen as sort of siloed away from each other. But it's crucial that they complement each other and they work together, and people that are designing ventilation systems and energy assessors and air tightness testers all talk to each other and understand the impacts of one another on the overall quality of that building for the homeowner. So we have to ensure good energy efficiency, of course, but we also have to make sure houses are comfortable for people to live in. Okay. In terms of Part L and Section 6, so in terms of energy efficiency, as I've hinted at, the target which we use for compliance is likely to have a move away from carbon towards primary energy following the changing of the grid and the EPBD recast. So that is coming. The clean growth strategy and the future home standard, as I said, is looking to move away from fossil fuel heating systems by 2025. In the methodology that we have currently in building regulations, we have something called a fuel factor, which basically gives some relief to off-gas grid houses, so houses heated by oil or LPG or electric. Now, because of the changing in the grid, we have to consider, is that still relevant, and is that still relevant to make sure we achieve our aims by 2025? Should we still be giving off-grid houses the same level of relief that we do currently? We want to halve our energy use in new buildings by 2030. As I said, how many regulation changes do we need to get there? You know, it's only 11 years away. It's not that far away. In the past 11 years, we've had 2 changes of building regulations. I would suspect we may need more than that if we want to get to our targets by 2030. And we need to be future-proofing houses going forwards as well to take low-carbon heating systems. So as I said, the world is changing. Energy reductions are coming, and clean energy is coming from renewables. So we have to think about how we prepare houses in the future for taking in different types of heating systems, moving away from more traditional heating systems that we use currently in this country. Okay. Now, the big headline for us as an industry was last week there was a consultation issued by government, and I'm focusing first of all on Part L, which is around energy efficiency. It's the first proposed change with building regulations we've had in terms of energy efficiency since 2013. There was a planned one in 2016, but unfortunately it didn't happen. However, as part of our commitments, we are going to have to make a bit of an uplift to our energy efficiency standards. So the consultation got issued last week. It's open until January the 10th. Elmhurst will be responding and on behalf of our members, and we'll be providing lots of training and CPD courses around the country. So if anybody wants a bit more detail on exactly what's happening with the consultation and what those changes are going to mean for buildings, please check us out on our website to book a slot on one of our courses. So first of all, there are new compliance targets proposed, and they're based on primary energy, as I suggested. Carbon will still be used as a metric for compliance, but that's going to be a secondary metric now. Primary energy is going to be the primary way we measure compliance in new build dwellings. And there were 2 levels of uplift proposed. There was a 20% option proposed, which is expected to be achieved by improving our sort of fabric standards, so our wall, floor and roof heat loss, and looking at fitting things like triple glazing, and that should give us a 20% reduction over our current standards. So a bit of a lower leap forwards, but obviously it's probably slightly lower cost to house developers as well. The second option proposed was a 31% reduction, so a bit of a bigger leap forwards, and this would be achieved by use of more low and zero carbon technologies on the dwellings. So again, we'd still be building to tight fabric standards, good levels of air tightness, but we'd be looking at pretty much mandating the use of photovoltaic panels or heat pumps or solar hot water panels or wind turbines to get to our 31% reduction. So the government are asking for people's opinions on which level of uplift they believe is achievable, and they're minded to go for the 31% jump at this point, which gives us less work to do when we come around to reviewing building regulations again for 2025. Okay, now having said that, and having talked about the increase in electricity, clean generation going forwards, electricity is still seen as the most expensive fuel to use in terms of our energy bills. So it's proposed that we introduced a new standard called the Household Affordability Check, which will be based on the EPC rating of a building. And the aim of this is to ensure that although people are using predominantly electric heating systems going forward, it's not going to push them into having very high energy bills and possibly even fuel poverty. So there'll be a target to make sure we don't exceed a certain banding on an EPC. EPC ratings are based on cost. So that A to G rating you see on the front is based on the energy efficiency cost of running the building. Okay, now they haven't proposed a actual value as yet. They're asking for industry's opinions on what would be a suitable minimum standard to build to. Okay, they're looking at improving the building fabric standards from what they are currently, and also uplifting the service minimum standards as well. So that's your boiler efficiencies, your heating controls, your lighting standards. All of those have seen a slight uplift compared to the previous version of Part L. In terms of air pressure testing or air tightness testing, in the current version of regulations for large sites of houses, you can actually almost do like a type approval, so a sample testing regime. So not every single dwelling need be tested. You can test sort of per house type and use that sample across the same dwellings on the site. There are concerns whether that is still appropriate based on sort of stories of certain dwellings being tested and other dwellings not then learning from the mistakes of the tested dwelling. So the government have mandated or recommended that every single new build dwelling, whether it's on a large site or whether it's a single one-off plot, should always have an air tightness test carried out on completion. So air tightness testing is really important. It's the one way that we really measure the build quality of the envelope on a building currently in building regulations. So the government are seeing that as an obvious way of addressing build quality issues going forwards. They're looking at tightening the transitional arrangements from current building regulations to the next version of building regulations as well. So currently, the building regulations allow you to build to older versions of regulations if you've started building work during that period. So if you deposit your building regulations application under one version of building regulations and you start work within a year of that depositing of the application, you're allowed to build to that version of building regulations through the lifespan of the building. Now that could see some buildings that last 5 or 6 years to be built still being built to older regulations. So they're looking at tightening that up a little bit and moving to more of a plot specific approval process. So currently if you start work on a building on a site under a previous version of regulations, the entire site then qualifies to stay under that version of regulations. And they're looking at moving away from that and addressing each plot on its individual merits. So when every plot starts work, that will determine which version of building regulations it falls under. Okay, now that could be quite interesting. It's certainly going to mean much more involvement from both energy assessors and building control about knowing exactly what's going on site and when these plots are starting to be built to ensure the correct version of regulations are applied. They also said that planners will not be allowed to set higher standards than the regulations they're proposing. So again, currently we have different planning authorities around the country advocating different levels of improvements over the current building regulations. This has caused quite a bit of confusion, certainly for our members producing reports. You can be working in one local authority which require one set of standards, and then a different local authority will require a different set of standards. There's also the London Plan as well, for any of you that do London Plan, that have their own set of standards again. And I think the government have kind of decided this is a bit too complex, and it's resulting in different levels of energy efficiency in different parts of the UK, which is not really what the goal is. So they're going to mandate that actually you won't be able to build to any higher standard than it's in the regulations, or planners won't be able to ask for higher standards. That's a very brief snapshot of what was in the consultation issued last week. There's lots more detail than that, of course, but they're the main headlines which will affect the industry going forwards. Okay. They're looking also at something called the performance gap, which, if you've not heard of this before, this is the gap between the certificates we produce and the actual as-built performance of the building in practice. Okay, now there's lots and lots of different reasons why buildings don't necessarily perform as they were designed. It can be a result of product substitution on site, from economic pressures or lack of supply of certain products, lack of communication between the building site and the energy assessor. So we're looking at ways we can narrow that gap and make sure the certificates we are producing are reflective of the buildings that we actually live in. Okay, the Zero Carbon Hub have done a lot of work on the performance gap in the past few years, and also there's been other studies as well. So this graph, on one site here, they did a survey and they found that on average 60% the performance of the actual building was 60% different to what was actually predicted on the energy certificate. And as I said, there's lots of research that's gone on. There's lots of complex reasons why this happens, but we're looking at tightening up the provision of information between what happens on site to what goes in the energy certificate, to making sure they're representative of what's being built. For part F, so concerning ventilation, again, there's a focus on indoor air quality. Part F and L are inherently linked. There's no use building a very, very airtight building to meet Part L compliance if it doesn't achieve good levels of ventilation, and then you lead to a building that's not effectively breathing. Okay, so we need to make sure our moisture levels and our pollutants are effectively removed by well-designed and efficiently operating ventilation systems. Overheating itself, so overheating in buildings is a big issue and is going to be dealt with in its own consultation due by the end of the year. Okay, so Part F was also consulted on last week, and some of the headlines that have come out of the consultation is they're looking at simplifying the documents and guidance. If you've ever read Part F, it can be quite difficult to understand initially. So looking at making things more streamlined, providing more information to building owners, as the use of mechanical ventilation and sort of intelligent systems becomes more popular. We need to make sure that the building owners actually understand the systems they're running to make sure they're run efficiently as possible. Okay, as I said, there's a focus on minimizing indoor air pollution. They're looking at removing guidance for passive stack ventilation systems, which are very, very rarely used in this country, and changing some of the guidance around background ventilation rates that are required. Okay. So just a little bit more on overheating. As I've said, the way building regulations have gone, particularly in energy efficiency in the last 10 years or so, we've resulted in more well-insulated, more airtight buildings, which is great for energy efficiency, but it has to be balanced off against ventilation and thermal comfort of buildings, particularly when we have obviously hot periods, and particularly in urban areas. there has been some sort of stories and experiences over the past few years where buildings are getting so hot that it's not comfortable to actually live in, and we need to address that. That can't go on. Okay, there has been demonstrated links to mortality as well. Obviously, you've got poor sleep quality if you're always hot in your building. And what we don't want to be looking at is forcing buildings to use air conditioning, because again that uses energy and that is a drain on the electricity grid. So we need to make sure we're building buildings that don't overheat but use passive measures and are well designed to prevent this happening in future. As I said, there will be a separate government consultation on the area of overheating, and that's due to be released by the end of the year. Okay, so in terms of timelines, as I said, the consultation was issued in England, and this only affects England currently on the 1st of October. It's due to close on January the 10th, and the regulations are due to be published next spring, with a planned implementation of sort of autumn time next year. So we're about a year away, based on current timelines, for a change in building regulations in this country. In Scotland, it was recently announced that next year they will be reviewing their building standards as well, and looking at the energy efficiency requirements in their current standards and proposing some uplifts, and they're expecting their new version of standards to be introduced late 2021. In Northern Ireland, we don't have any information about when they're planning to update their building regulations yet, and Wales the same as well. Wales are usually about a year after England, but we don't have any concrete information on what's happening yet. Okay, so that's for new build homes. I'll just quickly go through some of the things that are affecting existing houses as well. Obviously, existing houses make up the bulk of our housing in this country, so they offer the greatest scope for energy and carbon savings. So we have the minimum energy efficiency standards, which were introduced in 2017. So for any landlords out there, hopefully you should be aware that it's actually illegal to rent out a property that's F4G rated now. There's a move towards reducing those standards again to a C-rated EPC by 2030, and Scotland are introducing a similar scheme next year called PRS as well. Green mortgages seem to be making a comeback, so lenders are providing mortgages based on your EPC rating. As you've seen earlier, there's lots and lots of consultations that have been issued which focus on energy performance certificates as well. And there's the Each Home Counts report, which is looking at retrofitting and the able to pay market for retrofitting houses. Okay. So Each Home Counts, you can go and read it. It's an independent review of consumer advice protection and standards for energy efficiency and renewable energy. Okay. So spun from that is the new standard PAS 2035, which is the standard now being adopted for retrofitting existing houses, and that's aimed at using good design, good installation, and good advice to homeowners to make sure energy efficiency measures are installed where they're suitably able to be. Okay, and Trustmark are overseeing the new framework for installations under the PAS 2035 standard. Onto commercial things. On part L2 of the building regulations, which governs new build commercial buildings, that's expected to come out very shortly. And again, there's a similar time scale for uplift of regulations, so consultation will be issued shortly, regulations announced next spring to be implemented next autumn. Okay. In Scotland, again, there's expected there'll be a consultation issued on proposed improvements to standards next year, with an implementation in 2021. For existing commercial buildings, the MEES standards also apply, so it's illegal to rent out an F4G rated building in England and Wales. Okay, and there's other schemes, so there's the energy savings opportunity schemes, which affects the large companies in this country, and it requires them to make improvements in terms of the energy efficiency of their buildings. So just in conclusion, as you can see, there's been lots and lots of activity over the past couple of years. We're awaiting lots of policy to come out of that. We expect things to be happening over the next couple of years. The government are quite keen that industry lead the solutions that are proposed. You know, we hear and we speak to our members on a daily basis, hearing their experiences, and we respond and sort of advise government on what we're hearing and how that should lead solutions going forwards. Okay. Obviously, we may go out of Europe, but we have our own targets, as I've shown, and they will fundamentally require us to keep improving the efficiency of our buildings. Okay. So just a little bit on energy assessments. Energy assessments and certificates, which is what our members produce, are at the heart of many policy documents, and many of the consultations that have been issued are fundamentally linked to energy certificates produced. So the methodologies are constantly evolving. There are new versions of domestic and non-domestic energy efficiency methodologies being produced all the time, and it's important that they recognise the technologies that are coming as well. Okay, so we speak to government again about that and things we hear that are coming, and they're speaking to manufacturers to make sure what is being planned for the future is relevant. Okay, so it's positive. There's lots of opportunities coming up. We're waiting to see policies. As I said, building regulations are looking to be changed in the next year. And one of our kind of mottos at this company is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So the calculations that are out there and being produced need to be used wisely going forwards. Okay, so thank you for listening. I believe it's time for any questions.
Hi, thank you there. Right, so this is the opportunity now for everybody to send in their questions. I'll be fair with you. At the moment, I'm sitting here waiting for some to come in. So,
okay.
So now's the time. So whilst everyone's thinking of the questions, typing those and sending those over to us, what I'm just going to quickly do is just let everybody know that our next webinar is on the 13th of November, and we're looking at structural safety and structural failures. So after this session, an email will go around, and I'll include the registration link within that email. So if obviously you want to attend, then pop that in your diary, register, sign up, and it will follow the same format on that day. Whilst we just get some more questions coming in, because I can see a few dropping in now, you may have noticed from the intro slides that CABE has a different look. We have in the last week, we announced it at our annual conference, we have rebranded and we're repositioning ourselves within the industry, working sort of with the strapline of constructive collaboration and becoming a unifying voice within the construction sector. So we hope you like our new appearance. It's going to put us sort of at the forefront of the industry. So with that, I've got a question.
Okay.
So let me just have a look. Right, what is your view on replacing a gas boiler with electric for domestic dwelling heating? Is this satisfactory in meeting guidance?
Good question. At the moment, in the current version of regulations, it's probably not looked on favourably, unless it was an electric heat pump, because the efficiency of heat pumps is so much greater than sort of our traditional panel heaters that we have. However, as I said, going forwards, with the reduction in carbon emissions from electricity, that may become more viable. So we don't really know. The consultation that was issued was really only aimed at new builds, so we don't really know what they're going to propose for renovations, replacements of heating systems and conversions and extensions, but it may be that actually in future that may be a more viable method of improving a building than it is currently.
Excellent, thank you. And now let me just have a quick look at this one. How much does it cost on average to have an EPC done on an existing 1930s house? There you go, putting you on the spot there.
Oh God. Every assessor charges different fees. It depends on the length of time they think they're going to be there, depends on the amount of travel they have to do, depends on the complexity of the house. An average price, I wouldn't like to guess. I mean, we don't get involved in terms of setting the average prices or setting any prices of what our members charge our customers. It's very, very difficult to answer that question without knowing how far the assessors are going to have to travel to your building. There might be someone that's around the corner, there might be someone that has to travel half an hour, and that will all affect the fee. I'd say on average, we do hear some stories of people charging very low fees, and we have no real control over this, as I said, but the amount of work that is required to do an energy performance certificate, every time the methodology is changed, increases. So you would expect prices to increase as well. And obviously we're advocating quality, so we would expect a quality job to be done, which should be reflected in the price as well. But I can't really give you an average price, unfortunately.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. I appreciate putting you on the spot on that one. Right, so Daniel has asked, thinking about the performance gap of new build housing, is the builder's submission of what has been built the problem, or a problem?
Possibly. I think generally there is a lack of communication, certainly necessarily between the builder and the energy assessor in some circumstances. I mean, in the consultation that was issued last week, one of the things that I didn't mention is they're looking at creating a new sort of compliance report, and they're looking at using photographic evidence from site as well, which will have to be submitted to building control to sign a building off, and all of that will be provided to the homeowner as well. So currently, in terms of energy performance certificates, on construction assessors don't have to visit site. It's a desktop exercise, and they're reliant on what the builder kind of tells them has been done, which, you know, depending on the builder, may or may not be 100% accurate. So there's definitely work to be done there. Like I said, the consultation is asking for people's opinions on what can be done to improve that, but certainly communication from site to assessor is one of the things that we would say definitely needs to be improved, and the builders need to recognise the role of the on-construction assessor in this process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going on from, so that's talking about new build, and there's a couple of questions here that now are talking about sort of like existing housing stock, and if I combine sort of the questions just to put it into one, but it's sort of like, how realistic is it, or how realistic do you think it is to actually upgrade old housing stock to meet the new standards?
Do you mean in terms of the sort of the new build standards? Well, obviously that's not really the aim. The aim is to just improve them as kind of is reasonably practical, without, you know, incurring unfeasible costs. So generally there's a lot of quite cost-effective improvements that can be made to existing buildings. There are certain buildings which you'll struggle with if they're very, very old. But it generally comes down to what's cost optimal, and different people have different opinions on what's cost optimal. But all existing buildings, there will be some form of improvement that can be made, I would say.
Excellent, that's fair. And then kind of now going sort of a little bit sort of off on one, but so the question here is, do you have an opinion on air source heating?
Do I have an opinion on it? Well, obviously it's based on what I've presented today. It's probably going to be the way that most developers go in terms of heating systems under the new regulations. They're very efficient. If they're installed and sized correctly, they can work very well with low temperature heating or underfloor heating. What I would say is that the homeowners that end up having these systems in their properties need to be educated on how to use them effectively, because they're not always used in the same way as traditional central heating systems. And that comes from provision of information from the builder or from the manufacturer. And sizing of them is crucial. You know, sometimes people do say they're a little bit noisy, so we have to take that into account as well. But generally, I mean, they're already used quite widely in off-gas grid properties, because that's just the way the current regulations have played out. But going forwards, I think they will be more and more widely used as the kind of the go-to option for central heating, I think.
Interesting. Okay, that pretty much wraps up any questions that have come in. I'm just looking through. So yeah, literally, people, you've got about 20 seconds now to send any questions in before we close the session. But on the basis that that's all I've got sitting here that's come through. I think, Jason, what I'll do, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
There's just, as we speak, something's popped in. Just sort of thank you, for your session coming in from those that have attended now, sort of very informative session. Problem. Brilliant, so thank you. And thank you guys for sharing that feedback with us as well. Yeah, so thank you for your time. Thank you to everybody who's joined us this morning. As I say, this session has been recorded. It's going to pop up onto our YouTube channel within the next hour or so. So if anybody that attended today and you think your colleagues might benefit from the content of this session, please do share that link with them, so they can then catch up sort of at their leisure. But again, if you've got any feedback on webinars or any sessions that you would like us to cover, any specific topics, regulations, anything sort of industry related that you think would make a good sort of 40-50 minute presentation, do get in touch. Alternatively, if you think yourself you could deliver one of our webinars, again, let us know, because we'd love to have you on board. So with that, I'll wrap up. Again, thank you all for your time, and we will see you online next month.